I'm Alex Howard.
And I'm Amanda Silver. And this is Dirty Laundry.
Do you know what I have to talk about that's recent?
Taylor Swift?
No. I mean, and my depressed daughter because I couldn't afford to take her. Step one.
Not everyone could take their kids.
Oh, it was really hard to watch. And honestly, we were like even listening to the radio in the car. And I was like changing the channel because they were like, who's got tickets? Like changing the channel. She's so sad.
It's very Willy Wonka. Like the golden ticket.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah,
like all these kids
analogy.
that want the golden ticket. And like, am I going to get it? Did you enter that contest, Mom? Like, I feel like I put a lot of pressure on parents. Like,
it was horrible and unrealistic. I'm sorry, $10,000 a ticket? Who in the world has that kind of money?
Well, I saw them interviewing people at the concert and they paid such a range. So some people were like, oh yeah, my ticket was $300.
I know.
And the other person was like, mine was $6,700. I'm like, it's so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
we didn't go. And it was devastating. What I was going to tell you, my devastating news.
Okay.
I ate a really sharp piece of toast and it scratched my gum and like my whole cheek is so swollen and painful.
But it's not swollen.
It's really first world problems, but it hurts so much and I can't haven't eaten since. I know. It's very drama.
Have strange things.
You know what? I just got to keep you on your toes.
You have some strange
really hurts.
Medical
Do you ever have
things?
that? Sometimes it'll happen on the roof or like you'll scratch something
Yeah,
going
but it goes
down.
away in like a day.
Ooh, this is
Really?
day 2. And it's getting like more.
You know
and more
why?
swollen.
Because you're the mom who eats the burnt toast.
Oh, I eat the toast. Yeah,
Right?
the crusts. I'm the
That's what
crust
we do.
mom.
That's what moms do.
It's so
I
true.
think it was it what's her name, Terry Hatcher, where she had
Oh, I
a
love
book or something
her.
called
Yeah.
The Burnt Toast or something about moms always eat the burnt toast because the kids aren't going to eat it.
It's
'cause
so
you burnt
true.
it. So you're
Yeah.
like, you know what? I'm not going to
Yeah.
put it to waste. So
Yeah,
I'll just,
we used to always joke with the toddler diet that was like half eaten, one half a chicken
Oh,
nugget.
I come home from dropping my kids off at school and I'm like,
crust.
they're leftovers, like the Eggo waffles or whatever. I'm like, oh, why not before my meeting? I'm like, that's easy. Listen, if they're sick, I'm going to get whatever they have.
Inevitable.
So there's no, there's no stopping that,
No.
especially this season.
This season has been bad.
People are getting,
It's real bad. And apparently COVID is like really up. I know
What?
that.
No, I don't want to talk about
as if
COVID.
we're still talking about COVID, but
Ugh.
it's like a legitimate thing. But let's not talk about it. Let's
No
instead
COVID.
talk about our amazing guest.
Yes, Lauren Larusso. I spotted her. I'm going to take this one.
Take it away.
I'm going to take the credit because I spotted her on Instagram. She had this reel. It had 11 million views. Like she's just and she just shares such raw, real things that people can relate to.
Yeah.
And she's amazing. She's a psychotherapist. The reel that I'm talking about was about her separating from her daughter and how her daughter didn't know that when she was going to see her again. And I'm like,
so
anyone who's divorced can relate to that.
Yeah.
When you've got little kids and they don't really know the schedule and you drop them off and they're like, Mommy, when am I going to see you again?
Yeah.
Oh, it's 2 sleeps, it's 3 sleeps. It's a tough conversation to have. And then you leave feeling like it's tough.
And it's not like when you're just going on vacation. You're like, I'll be back in a week. Catch you later. It's
or they drop
so
off at
different.
school. I also noticed that like sometimes when I drop my kids off at school on like a Friday morning, it's like, oh, I'll see you Monday. It's tough.
I know. And we encourage folks to do transitions at school or, a program or something so that there isn't that sort of interaction with folks, especially if they're high conflict. But then, you go just drop them off and
it's not, I'll see you at the end of the day. It's,
Yeah.
I'll see you in 3 days.
Yeah. And Lauren, I mean, she's so vulnerable. She's so honest
Yes.
about topics that people do not want to talk about,
No.
but we need to.
Yeah. I mean, good for her for being able to share
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
We need
she's
more people like
amazing.
her to destigmatize,
Yeah.
de-shame,
Yes.
and just air it out.
Air it all
So
out.
welcome, Lauren.
So we kind of like to start with a bit of backstory, just sort of who you are and how you ended up in the field that you're in. And then we'll just dive right into the work and get into the meat and potatoes of everything. But who are you? How did you end up here?
Well, I'm a therapist by trade and training. I'm a betrayed spouse by life story. So I was a therapist long before my marriage unraveled because of an affair. And, I just love focusing on what's going to help people understand themselves better and know themselves more clearly and deeply so they can live a life that's in greater alignment and empowerment. And so, I was on that path. I had a private practice, all good, raising a little daughter. And as it can happen, Fair Discovery just blew my life apart. And there really wasn't any coming back from that. I thought there would be or could be. And over the months after that discovery, everything devolved and my marriage did end. So it's been about 6 years since then. And essentially, worked really hard to do my own work and learn everything I could about affairs, why they happen, how they happen, the dynamics behind them and underneath them, the motivations, and really how to heal on all sides. And I just noticed that every time I learned something new to help myself heal, it just enhanced my practice so tremendously. And so I was in this place where all of it was really coming together. It really was a gift in my life that all happened because all this wisdom just came pouring into me. And then I got to a place where I really wanted to speak to this issue more widely because it is really frequently experienced and it is very infrequently acknowledged and discussed in a way that helps people heal or grow from it.
Yeah.
The stigma and the shame and the silence really keeps people trapped in the pain. And I just wanted to be a part of the solution to that. So here I am doing this work.
I love it.
so
And you're making it
wonderful.
so accessible. And by, sort of role modeling that you have this lived journey, you have gone through it, you're able to really speak to that. How do you find sort of self-disclosing? I mean, you have obviously a public persona. Is that tricky to kind of walk the fine line between oversharing and sort of being professional?
Absolutely is. And as therapists, we are deeply trained to check ourselves at the door of all work that we do with anyone. And so I'm constantly moderating myself as it meets the intersection of the work that I do. That's just, ethically and training wise, how we approach the work. And at the same time, it wouldn't be authentic if I didn't bring myself into it. That's where the trust and the experience really comes in. And I think dealing with intimate betrayal in any form, you do have to sort of have lived it in a way. It's like anything in our lives, to really be able to empathize with it on a deep level. It's sort of one of those like, if you know type of things. And so I always ask myself, like, is this in service of people out there if I'm sharing this particular piece? And so that helps me moderate and modulate what I do or don't bring to the table. Because it's easy to go out there and bring any of your unhealed parts. And that's something that I work very, very hard to make sure that I'm not doing. I've done a lot of healing at this point. So that's not really a problem for me, but I'm always just asking myself, what's the purpose of this if I were to share something personal? And if it's for the greater good, I will. And if it doesn't feel necessary, I don't.
Yeah.
You shared something personally, I think it was a few months ago, which is how I sort of came about your profile, where it was a video of you in the car, I guess after a transition. I guess you dropped your daughter off at the bus or something, and you were crying. And the caption said, I guess the feeling of when the child asks, "When am I going to see you next, mommy?" And that hit me so hard because I feel that I felt that right in my gut because I'm divorced and my kids go back and forth. And that feeling, I was like, wow, I've never actually thought about that. Like when you're on a call with them or you drop them off and they from their perspective, they just innocently ask, when am I going to see you next? Because they don't know the answer because they're so young. And like that just really touched me. And I see so many people on Instagram. I'm so active on there, but that one really got to me. And you were really vulnerable.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I would have never recorded something like that. And as I've gotten more comfortable in the space where I've developed a community of people who understand what I'm doing, and there's always going to be people who don't, but I was sitting there in the car and I had to let my grief, go where it needed to go. And I thought to myself, you know what? The biggest disservice we do on social media is show this like evolved, healed, it's a point of arrival. I don't want that to be the case because that's not real. Yeah. And I, as I was kind of cleaning up my tears, I'm like, let me just take 6 seconds of this to share with my community to say, you know what? Life after betrayal is a life where I am thriving. And it also looks like this. Yep. It also looks like moments where I am deeply grieving all over again, and I have to tend to myself. And I did not expect that video. It's like over 10 million views at this point.
11 million.
Like, oh my God. I try not to look. I actually try not to look because I can't. I'm a highly sensitive person. I can't tolerate like that much attention or feedback, but it was really meant for the eyes of just a few. And, you know, you never know what's going to resonate with people. And it did.
And it just shows that people are craving that dose of reality. They want to see that others are struggling. It can't just be this curated, perfect life that we're showing. We have to show vulnerability. We have to show weakness. We have to be okay with asking for help. For those that are listening that are not, you know, trained therapists, asking for help is not easy. Being in touch with their emotions is not easy. What would you tell those folks that are going through it that don't have the years of professional training and are in that capacity as, you know, a healer of the mind? What's step one?
I would say allow your feelings and then get curious about them. When we're curious about how we're feeling, we allow for all of the scope of human emotions and experience, and all of it is valid and all of it is real and all of it should be allowed. And only once we get to that place where we're not fighting with ourselves or judging ourselves, because that's really what we do that makes things feel so bad. If we just allowed our feelings themselves, they would actually flow through us and out of us properly. We would cycle through our feelings. You know, instead we shame ourselves, we judge ourselves, we're berating ourselves or telling ourselves that we should or shouldn't be feeling, especially bad emotions. We're very happy, you know, we want happiness in our culture. We're very happy centric. And so we think if we're feeling something bad, it must mean something bad or we are wrong. No, all of our feelings are valid and should be accepted. And then say, what is this feeling trying to show me, right? So if we take that moment of grief that I felt, you know, 6 years later, as my daughter gets on the bus and turns around and says, Mama, when do I see you again? Okay, I'm not meant to not feel anything in that moment. It means I'm normal. It means that I didn't envision my life to look like that, where a child didn't know when she would see her mother again. And it's okay for me to need to fall apart and process and say, you know what? I'm going to allow myself to fully sob and grieve so that I can actually recover and repair and say, those tears are because I love and care about someone who's walking away from me, right? Or that this child doesn't have the childhood that I thought she would or that I grew up with. What is this telling me? And so once you can take a minute to just get curious, then you can begin to gain some personal insight about, you know, your own workings inside of yourself that are informing how you feel.
Talk to us about intimate betrayal. This is the first time I've ever heard it said that way.
Yeah, the term.
You hear infidelity, you hear affair, you hear cheater, you hear all these other synonyms. I don't know if you coined this or if this is like a technical term in like the DSM or whatever, but yeah, like I love it so much because it's giving a proper, let's say, term or proper weight to what it is without being sultry and yucky and judgy, I guess. I love it. How do you feel about it, having gone through it?
Intimate betrayal. I don't like intimate betrayal itself. I did not coin the term, but it refers to a dynamic in which we trusted our person. And there was a high level of intimacy in that relationship. It can even be, you know, something that happens in friendships, intimate betrayal. Right. But for our purposes, we're talking about a marriage, and a committed relationship. And especially in today's marriage, that intimate betrayal cuts so much deeper because we're more insulated than ever. We are more reliant on each other than ever. And we've really built ourselves into silos, right? We used to be in villages where we relied on a lot of people to get our interpersonal needs met, our needs for connection, intimacy, closeness. And now we really have put all our eggs in one basket with a spouse. And so what we need from our spouse is that they are infallible, right? They're going to hold this with all of their hearts and they're going to protect it because we're really in this together. And that intimate betrayal is, no, you had something that you kept from me, that you chose to step away and outside and turn away from our relationship and bring that somewhere else. And what was supposed to exist as sacred within the couple exists between people outside of the couple. And that is the devastating blow of intimate betrayal in whatever form it takes.
And do you think that it's more devastating if it is a longstanding relationship that's outside of the marriage that is, fed, or just, these one-off physical encounters?
It really depends on a lot of factors. How many times did it happen? What does it mean to that person? Also, the makeup of the betrayed spouse is really important in how these things land. There are betrayed spouses who are traumatized beyond belief by affair discovery or the discovery of infidelity. And then there are people who don't react the same way. And that has a lot to do with how things go from there and really what's worse, as you're asking. What's worse is in the eye of the person who experiences it, essentially.
I think that also lends itself to the conversation of, do I stay or do I go? Because sometimes you hear people who discover, affairs and then they stay together and it's hard to understand.
Yeah.
And
Most
for others,
people do.
it's a deal breaker.
Most people do.
I think most people do. Most people discover
Stay?
it and stay together.
Yeah.
And why do you think that is?
Well, we're living longer than ever. And so our marriages are supposed to last longer than ever. And I think that when you've built a life with someone, you share everything with that person and they do perhaps this one thing. And it might be a massive thing. And it might have been a year long, 2 years long, whatever it is. Am I going to let that one thing take down everything else that I have already ascribed to the life that I know and recognize? And also that projected future that I was attached to. We live in the future period as a species. And so a lot of times it's looking ahead and saying, you know what? I want to go visit our grandkids together someday. I want to be dropping our kids off at college together. Couples still have visions and goals. So if the person who stepped out of the marriage does want to work on it and stay and repair, absolutely. People stay together all the time. And sometimes even if they don't make the effort to repair, but they just don't leave, people just sweep it under the rug and continue on. And then there's people who use it as the catalyst for a new marriage together. And those are really the people who have the most interpersonal tenacity to say, all right, well, that tore down the previous construct. You went out and you got a bunch of things that I also want to. So let's explore this together. Let's revamp and recreate that. And those are the few, but that's also another version of what happens.
And it kind of reminds me of really what marriages should be. Obviously, aside from the affair or the betrayal, it's in your, let's say, 20s, you're dating, you don't have kids, maybe you're newlyweds, you're kind of in that honeymoon phase. And that's appropriate for that age and stage. And then our needs change. Now we've got kids, our lives are different. They're full and they're busy in a different capacity. Maybe we've drifted apart from our spouse because we're so involved in the kids' lives and in raising them. And then they become a little bit more independent. And so then we have a new phase where we come back together as partners. And I think if people aren't so terrified of change, or of looking back and going, remember that time we used to bone 4 times a week and we'd lie in bed all Saturday, watching Netflix and ordering in. What a great time that was. Yes, it was wonderful then. But now look where we are. And let's intentionally re-examine what that relationship looks like, what our priorities are, what we want from one another in this new age and stage, as opposed to, the kids are gone. I have nothing to say to you. We have no interest together. So peace out. I'm done with this. I just think we biologically are not monogamous. So this societal construct of marriage and of being with just one person, I mean, we can see how it's changing. Yeah, there's, polygamy and all of these other, sort of polyamorous relationships or whatever that looks like. we have to be able to sort of change and grow with our relationships. And so from your professional position, is that something that's like, hey, couples, start talking about this stuff. Don't be so afraid of change, but rather use it as an opportunity to sort of redefine what your relationship could be?
Yes.
I said a lot.
She usually does.
Okay.
She usually does. And I'm just like, tell me more.
Was there even a question in there? Lauren's turn.
Let me parse it out. Yes. So I think what you're saying is be a little more flexible over the course of a life cycle with a partner, and also turn towards each other in times of drifting or losing each other. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, that's something we get wrong about marriage. The minute that our marriage lets us down or fails us or doesn't feel the way it did, as you say, when we were boning 4 times a day in our 20s, we go, must be the person.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, I must have made the wrong choice. This, you know, and especially then if someone else steps into the picture who then that newness shows you, oh, I could have this over here. So it must be something wrong with my marriage. You know, you're dead on arrival. And I think that these high expectations we have, can we have some grace, you know, for women as they're going through pregnancy and healing from childbirth and lactating and, you know, and can we have some grace for dads who are no longer, you know, getting the attention but let's all just try to not deviate. It's about staying in, you know, in the commitment that really, I think, makes the difference for people. And it's not that simple. There's a lot of ways that people end up in an affair.
Right.
But I think what you're saying is, you know, if we could just hold on to our commitment, then under that construct, we can turn towards the person we made that commitment with and say, you know, how do we figure this out together? I'm not feeling the way I want to feel. Or, you know, I'm wishing that things were more this way and less this way. And you turn inward first, right? You wouldn't turn outward. And that would be beautiful, but that's not the way
But it seems
not the way it
human
goes.
nature
It's
is the opposite. We want to fix everything. We want a quick fix for things. So rather than taking the hard road of, okay, now I need to sit down with my spouse, maybe do some counseling, talk about what's not working, what is, something that's shiny at the office might be an easier fix. And it happens again and again and again. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of people have not communicated that openly with their spouse, even in their entire relationship. And then maybe kids enter the picture and you just get a little bit farther apart. And then you think, well, how could I bring this to them? Or maybe I don't even recognize it is an issue until it's too late. So there's a lot of intricacies underneath the surface of that, where in a perfect world, the minute someone would feel vulnerable to an affair, they would use that as a sign that they needed to turn back towards their relationship first or into themselves first and ask themselves the hard questions. Instead, we want to follow the shiny object.
Yeah.
You know, we have a lot of that dopamine desire.
Yes.
Exactly.
And I think it's that curiosity that you spoke of earlier, right? Okay, I'm having these interests outside of my marriage. What does that say about me and my marriage versus this third, you know, other additional party?
I think it's also the myth, and you talk about that, the myth about why affairs happen. And so I think this one's so interesting because I've seen you talk about how so often people think that, you know, he cheated or she cheated because they're missing something at home. But it's not always the case. Yeah, or they're blaming the person who they cheated on versus taking accountability. Like people think that there's something missing.
Yeah.
You know, I think because of the shame and silence and stigma around affairs, we really don't have a deep understanding of the issue at all. And so culturally, societally, I mean, since the beginning of time, we tell stories in order to understand the world. And so one of the stories is, must have not been getting it at home, or once a cheater, always a cheater. We have these platitudes to help us categorize things, and it helps us feel safe. It helps us feel we can navigate things we don't understand. Those are the things that do a great disservice to someone's real individual story that's going to help them get under the surface and use the affair to understand themselves more deeply. That's the whole point. You know, not everyone's interested in that level of inquiry, but you know, what you're saying is so true, which is, you know, there's so much more underneath it than just they're not getting something at home. You can think of an affair as a mirror. Every person in our lives reflects a different version of ourselves back at us. We are different people with different people. So when you think about an extramarital relationship, sometimes it's that you are experiencing yourself differently through the eyes of a different person. It's not that your spouse is unilaterally flawed in some way. It's that at home you experience yourself one way, or through the eyes of your spouse, you're used to, being seen or experiencing yourself through their eyes in a certain manner. And now suddenly I see a new thing being reflected.
I'm curious, Lauren, from a personal perspective, as you had gone through it, would you have said you were one to think, no, I would get through that and that changed? Or was that a deal breaker for you from the get-go?
It was a deal breaker for me, and I stayed. So here's what I also want to say.
Say more, please.
Part of what we ascribe to things we don't understand is, well, if that ever happened to me, I'd be out the door.
Yeah.
And we don't know. Wisdom is understanding that until we have walked a mile in someone else's shoes or actually had that experience, we don't know. Yeah. We cannot say for certain how we would handle anything. And so, yes, I always was someone who was like, well, that's a deal breaker. Obviously, you just get up and leave. I was glued to my place, and I was willing to do whatever it took to create a better marriage from whatever had created that thing that was happening outside of me. I was conflicted because on the one hand, I knew very deeply, if I was being honest with myself, I didn't want to be with someone who had treated me the way I had been treated. And as a therapist, I'm sort of one of those hope springs eternal type of people. There's always opportunity in everything devastating. No opportunity should go unwasted. So my first pass was, let me get every book I can and read and find Gottman retreats and buy us matching Christmas pajamas. And I just was telling myself these deluded stories that if I just turned myself into a pretzel, I could keep the ship from sinking. Yeah. And that just wasn't the case. It was very far from it. And that storytelling I did with myself in the months after affair discovery really kept me from seeing clearly how I wasn't being met in those efforts. My partner wasn't coming to the table with the same desire. Yeah. And I would feel it and I would spiral into despair, but then I would, I'm a hard worker. If I just put my mind to things, right? Us type A folks are going to go, I could do this all by myself and you'll see. No, that wasn't how it ended up. So I said to myself, if someday I look back on this, what will I have wished I had done during this time? And I just knew that for myself and for my daughter, I will have wanted to know that I did everything I could to manage the part that I was bringing into that post-affair discovery time. And I did that. To the best of my ability, I did that. And I learned that one person does not make a marriage, right?
Yeah.
So
how do we talk to our kids about this? So Amanda and I are mediators. We deal with divorce constantly. And these questions always come up from our clients. When do we tell the kids? How do we tell the kids?
Do we tell the kids?
And so then specifically when it comes to intimate betrayal, when it comes to affairs, and they're like, you've ruined our lives. You blew up our family. And we want to blame the other person. They're the reason. It's their fault. Not appropriate, of course, to tell the kids that. But at what point do you then cross over to, well, I'm sort of lying to my kids, or I'm maybe gaslighting them into thinking, no, everything is fine. Everything's hunky-dory. Like, what is that line when it comes to the children? And of course, ages and, stages vary. But is there a general sort of rule of thumb?
Here's the thing. We oftentimes don't know why an affair actually happened. Yeah. And sometimes it's the person who has been most hurt in the marriage over a long period of time who finally says enough, or who finally finds solace in a relationship outside of the marriage that emboldens them enough to leave it. And so, I never want to say that I know someone else's story of how they got there. And again, that's where that blaming and that victim perpetrator thing is so dangerous. Yeah. How did our marriage end? A million different things, right? A million different things. And did it end the way I wanted it to end? No, I wish we'd had a different story. But but we didn't. It ended the way it ended. So I think that once kids are adults and you can have adult conversations about more detailed things that might have transpired, that's a different story. But I think as long as kids are kids, we have to remember that their other parent is a half of them.
Yeah.
And that when we say this person's bad and I'm good, you're telling them that part of them is bad.
Yeah.
And they feel that shame and they don't know what to do with that. Or they feel parentified and like they need to come to your emotional aid because you're so hurt and this person hurt you. You know, what I find is that kids, they're going to ask a lot of questions, but it doesn't mean that they require the answer that we think they should get.
Yeah.
Just because someone asks doesn't mean
it doesn't
They
mean
have
that
a
they
right
can
to
handle
know.
it, that
Yeah.
they're ready for
They
it.
can't
13
handle it.
years old, they can't,
Yeah.
right? When they're 23, it's a different story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, I always caution anybody who's going through anything. I'm like, age appropriate honesty, number one. But then again, to your point, Lauren, this is our story. It's not necessarily theirs. And so we have to make adult decisions around our relationship. But that doesn't necessarily need to involve them. And I think it's really crucial for them to know that they had nothing to do with it. And almost the less they know, the better, because then they can keep both parents, you know, on the pedestals that kids do. And I just, it's so hard when you are going through it and you're betrayed and you are vengeful and you want them to know this was not my choice.
Yeah.
And
it is very hard to use that self-restraint. And I also caution against gaslighting children. So for example, in my case, my daughter's very empathetic. She also has eyeballs.
Yeah.
She could see that I was crying, right? I'm not going to say, mommy's fine, right? No, I'm going to say mommy's deeply sad.
Yeah.
I didn't want this to happen and it did. And you know what? It's going to be okay, right? Kids just want to know they're going to be okay.
Yeah.
You're going to be okay. And that their needs are going to be met in an ongoing basis. And they're going to continue to be loved and in connection with both parents. So don't pretend things aren't what they are, because kids are they're sponges and they're watching and they're absorbing constantly. Honor what they're witnessing and redirect to how you can handle yourself. They don't need to take care of you, and they will continue to be taken care of and loved. Yeah. And I find that usually handles it properly.
What about friends and family? How much, you know, these are presumably adults. How much do people need to share to sort of get the help and the support they need? And how much is it now you're just slandering or shitting
it's also
on people?
You can't unring a bell.
No, and,
right?
and
once you tell that story, I've told my clients this. I'm like, if you know, once they might be considering reconciling. Once you tell that story to your friends, you can't take that back.
Yeah. And if you're the one that stepped out, now you're dealing with the, you know, maybe the guilt or the shame yourself in sort of a different way. I just find
social repercussions.
Well, in divorce, listen, family and friends have so many opinions on how you should be dealing with your divorce. Now we're adding a whole new layer, right? Because it's not like, oh, well, we just sort of drifted apart. Nobody's at fault. It's like we are told this person is at fault.
There's a bad guy and there's a good guy. And exactly.
Yeah. And I think that there's nothing like dealing with an affair to teach you how to exercise like wisdom and appropriate boundaries with family and friends. So one of the things that I think is really important to learn is, what's the source of the feedback I'm getting? And am I going to get my needs met from this person? So if I tell my mom, and she's been married to my dad for 55 years, and, you know, she thinks marriage should last at all costs, but I'm being gaslit and tortured, and, you know, maybe mom's actually not the person who's going to be able to give me the feedback I need. Maybe she actually is. Maybe she'll say, get the fuck out of there. I know you and my dad have been married for 55 years, but what are you doing? So just, you know, before you share, because to your point, you know, you can never unsay something that you've said. Just look at the person that you are sharing it with. Make sure you're not setting yourself up to get a lot of unsolicited opinion and feedback that maybe be more damaging and unhelpful than helpful. And this is where a lot of times people really start with like one really trusted person who they know keeps themselves in check enough to just be focused on like, what do you need here right now, right? Whatever you decide, I'm here for you. That neutral person is the best person that you can choose. A lot of times folks who have a strong faith base will go to like faith-based counseling or a pastor where marriage at all costs, is what's being championed. That's okay. And again, it's about questioning the source. Who is the person advising me? What's their innate bias towards the situation at hand? And how is that informing what they're telling me? And then am I, very susceptible to that at this point? How do I check what I'm hearing against what I deeply am understanding I might want for myself or need for myself? And that's a hard balance, especially for people pleasers or, folks who are just so overwhelmed and traumatized from the experience itself. It's a very vulnerable time.
What is your advice for people who have recently discovered an affair, or they think there's an affair and they're in that position where they just don't know, but they kind of do? What do you think? What should they do? How should they handle it?
Well, I would stay very quiet and pay very close attention. Here's one thing that I always joke. I made a lot of rookie mistakes as a betrayed spouse. What I would do is I would beg my husband for the truth. Life was no longer making sense for a very long time. And I would just be in tears. Please, please, I don't know what's happening. Please. And nothing. And so you're relying on the person who is, the person who is constructing and orchestrating all of it to be honest with you, right, because your brain categorizes them as someone that you can trust. And so you're like, well, I trust you. You're my person. So if I ask you something, you're going to be honest with me, right? No, this is someone who has created their own path of dishonesty in which you are not a part of. And so they're not about to bring you in, So in some cases, people are honest, but I would say that one of the things that betrayed spouses do, and which I did, is they bring all the evidence and they show it, and then it just gets hid better. And then you just go crazier because it's just hid better. If I had to do it all over again, I probably would just quietly, silently pay good attention. And I don't know if I could have done that. But once you find out for sure, you have to ask yourself, what am I going to do with this? Because it is a moment where your life ends when you find out. And you're grieving immediately what you thought you knew. And so the question needs to be, well, how am I going to handle this? If I present this to my spouse, am I hoping for one thing or another? What do I need here to be supported and sane? Because what happens is we tend to only rely on the person who has created the construct that we're not a part of. And then things really go sideways because we don't know what's real. We don't know what's true. And we're relying on the person who's been lying to us to help us heal when perhaps they're not ready for that. They're not completely both feet into the marriage yet. They haven't maybe ended the affair yet, because sometimes discovery happens before, actually, usually it happens before the two people in the affair were ready or prepared to end the relationship. And then when the relationship continues, it's like, well, you just kept lying and betraying me. They weren't in the place where they needed to be when the affair was discovered. So I guess I would say, long story short, really, really, really take care of yourself. If you think there's an affair, you need to treat yourself with every amount of care and compassion and gentleness, and give yourself as much support as you can. And when things don't feel right, just pause, ask yourself why, and try to honor your truth over the other person's truth if things just aren't feeling like they should. It takes time.
Yeah. So impactful. Yeah. What are you hoping the outcome is going to be?
And don't seek the truth from the person who's doing the lying.
These are some great nuggets of wisdom, man. But you're right, because this was your person.
So it's like,
yeah, I'm going to turn to my person to help me explain and understand and feel better about the things that I'm feeling. And they're like, I'm not here for that because I'm causing it.
Out there. Yeah.
Whew. This is the loneliness there. You're on your own.
Yeah.
You're on your own, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, it's a very despairing place to get to as a spouse. You know, I would say it's rock bottom, right? So if you're going to be at rock bottom in that moment, you really just need to get your basic needs met as a primary focus. And then you can start to move into some of those higher order things. I think that's something, and not to go too long, but that's something that a lot of therapists or helping professionals get wrong, is that they want to dive into the higher order thinking when really people need to be stabilized at the bottom of their most basic needs, right? I'm trembling, I'm traumatized, I'm insomniac, I'm not sleeping,
not eating.
My nervous system shot, I'm ruminating. And then you want me to do Gottman's Sound House?
Right.
And you know, like, but that happens all the time. Like, let's talk about this higher level thinking. Our brains literally can't access.
Or create a parenting plan.
Yeah.
Or discuss your finances.
Yeah.
You know?
Well,
It's
and then
like,
you realize 2 years later, why did I agree to that parenting plan? I was out of my damn mind. And I was, we're in our primitive brain. We're in our survival brain. And we can't really trust the person who's having those conversations, making those decisions. So stability and sanity needs to be your primary goal.
That is such a great point. This is like very much Maslow's hierarchy, right? Like, we got to get back to basics with you as an individual on your own, no longer reliant upon that person. How are you going to take care of yourself? Let's get to the basic needs.
and your kids at the same time.
I mean, listen,
right.
there's kids and there's
children at the
financial
same
disclosure
time,
and there's
these
all of the things, but
it's just,
but
it's
a
so
good
much for one
reminder
person.
to put a pin in all those things. Yes, obviously you can't just stop parenting,
But you have to take on everything.
but maybe you don't do it all at
All at
once.
once.
Maybe you go back and say, you know what, mom, nanny, whoever, what kind of a support system you have, I need to go away for a week, take my kids. I got to go work on
Get my head together.
Get my head together.
Yeah.
Again, easier said than
Let people
done.
take care of you.
Yeah.
Let people take care of you, right? During my situation, the people who showed up on my doorstep with food when I didn't ask for it, or neighbors who called me and said, "Are you okay? I just look over and I just want to make sure you're okay." Those moments mean the world to somebody who isn't willing to ask for anything from the people around them. So, you know, I'll never forget the people who did that. And I still think about it all the time. So let people love you and let yourself be blown away by that care and love, and let yourself receive it, and let it be a message that you deserve that kind of love. And let people take your kids. Let people bring you food. Let people do what is going to help them feel like they can do a small part in something they can't stop from happening, but they deeply want you to be better. And, you know, you'll recover, but it'll take time. So let people love you.
People want to, right? They want to help.
Yeah.
They want to take
But they
care.
can't help if they don't know.
Exactly.
Right? So it goes full circle.
They're not
with the
mind
whole-
readers.
Yeah.
Yeah. They don't, if no one knows what's going on in your life.
No one knows what's going on in your life.
Exactly.
Oh, Lauren,
Yeah.
you're amazing. Thank you
good.
so much. This was
Thank you.
incredible.
Yeah.
Thank you for your bravery and your vulnerability and talking about the things that nobody wants to talk about, because it is healing and it is helpful and it is beautiful. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. This is great.
This episode was written and created by Alex Howard and Amanda Silver. Produced, edited, and engineered by RTF Productions. Make sure to rate and review our show if you loved it, and give us a follow on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you stream your podcast to stay up to date on all upcoming episodes. Thanks for listening, and go easy on us. We're not your ex.